Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We hope you let us know where you think we got it right and where we totally missed the point, which you can do by visiting our website, unsilentpodcast.com. Let's get into it. What are we talking about today, Brian?
Well, Dave, let's jump into climate change.
Fun.
Of all the topics going on in our world right now, this one might be one. Well, certainly one of the most heated. And if there was a Hall of Fame of things to argue about, this would be a first round contender or first round inductee. My entire lifetime, anyway. It's been a hot topic. There's no question. So there's with this topic though. There's like, I don't know, 8 or 12 or 53 subtopics, and they run the gamut from: is there climate change? Did man cause it? Can man solve it? And then there's this kind of control element. There's kind of what feels like maybe a religious aspect, and we'll get into all that stuff. But where do you think we start?
Well, I think we have to first start with this idea of the debate. Why is there such a big debate about this? And ultimately, I think it comes down to something that Rahm Emanuel said. Barack Obama's chief of staff, never let a good crisis go to waste. So
Right.
in the climate change debate, it covers basically everything that humans do on Earth. And so therefore, strong government control with lots of money is at stake when we're talking about what to do about the thing. So I think that's where
back
it
when I was
starts.
a kid, it was pollution was the thing. Like and then recycling became a thing, which I'm super glad it did. I think
Yep.
that's wise. And then it was global. Well, then it was the ozone, and like aerosols and the ozone was going to go away, and we were going to be vaporized by the sun and radiation. Which, okay, if that's the thing, that's cool. That we know about that, and we try to solve that, of course. And then it became global warming, and then global cooling, and then now it's just this all-encompassing climate change. And like you said, the power and money that goes into place or is applied, that the power applied and the money spent, seems to be the only way to fix this thing is taking away people's ability to make decisions, restrict their movement, their choices, and spend somebody else's money. That seems to be the only solutions available for this particular issue. Is that your understanding as well?
That's the proposal. That's basically the proposal, is that we all essentially go back to the dark ages. We don't drive our cars, or hopefully there'll be EVs by that time. Hopefully there'll be enough EV stations to deal with it. But ultimately, we're being told we have to cede our freedom and all of our wealth and all of our progress to the experts, and they will save us. Kind of like a priesthood, if you will.
Yeah. So, and I'm not being a wise ass here. I don't think I'm being really serious about this. When you say all of us will have to do this, is it really all of us who are going to do it, or will there be we're all equal except for some of us are more equal than others kind of a thing, where there'll still be some folks who, well, you can't be John Kerry and not have a plane. Like you can't be Bill Gates and not have a plane, right? Am I? And I'm only being half a smart ass there, but am I missing something where they said, yeah, we're all going to go back to this substandard way compared to how we live now, or is it no, just the regular folks will do that and other folks will still have their thing?
Well, that's what infuriates people about this. That Bill Gates can still fly his plane to go do and he's done good philanthropy work all over the world. So
Yeah.
no dissing him on that. But basically, he has the money to buy carbon credits in order so he can live in his multi-gazillion square foot house, so he can fly his planes. I'm sure he's got multiple planes all over the world. John Kerry can do the same thing. All of the rich people can pack all of their planes in these climate conferences and talk to each other, while the rest of us are told, no, don't go to work because you're burning fossil fuels and you're going to kill the planet.
So, and again, part of our goal here for those of you listening is to get this accurate. Now, I made a smart ass comment earlier, and we have our opinions, Dave and I. There's no question, but we want to be accurate also, and that's why we say go to unsilentpodcast.com, chime in where you think we're getting it right. So, but we want to get this part right. So, Dave, it seems to me that and I mean this literally in this case, the only solutions I've heard for solving this problem involve spending tax dollars from US and other Western countries' citizens, right? And clamping down on things like travel, vehicle choices, other kinds of things that that have varying degrees of direct involvement with climate decisions we can make about different things. Am I wrong there? Have you heard like legitimate proposals to solve this problem that don't require just spending regular taxpayer money in the trillions of dollars, like literally 50 trillion is the last number I heard, and completely clamping down on people's ability to be mobile and make decisions about everyday things?
Well, and that's really where the debate has gotten off track, because there's been sort of two ways of thinking about it, two extremes, and that is nothing's happening, we can ignore the whole thing, or we have to stop doing everything that's made us, an affluent society, and except for the people that are the truly affluent among us, and we have to
Right.
spend trillions of dollars. Whereas there's a growing chorus of voices that are kind of more in the middle, what I would say in the middle, that are saying, yes, some of what we can do, we can be more efficient about what we do, how we use fossil fuels. We're not going to cut it all by 2030. That's just not
Right.
realistic. But we can also develop new technologies in order to replace fossil fuels in a reasonable period of time. So this is where I identify is the middle ground that says technology over a longer period of time with mitigation to the negative effects of climate change. So there's certainly negative effects to an Earth that would be 3 degrees warmer in 2100 than it was in 1850. There's some
Right.
negative effects with that. And there are places, however, that have started to do mitigation of those negative effects at the same time that they're not robbing their citizens of their basic rights, their basic choices, their economy. So you
Yeah.
have to come up with a solution that actually works for everybody, and that's what the extremes that have gotten the debate off track have not done.
Yeah, I think again, just kind of anecdotally, peripherally, whatever. I don't know anybody who's anti-technology. I mean, I literally don't know anybody like that. I
No,
don't know anybody who says we should go back and be driving, 78 Pintos that are spitting all kinds of stuff in the atmosphere. I don't know a person who thinks like that. I don't know a person who doesn't believe that some version of electric cars, maybe flying cars, like whatever, some version of that's inevitable, probably, right?
sure.
So what do you suppose, as best as you can, what do you suppose the reason is that this has to be urgent, that we can't allow technology over the course of 5, 10, 20, 50, whatever years? Why is the argument the world is ending in 12 years? Now, this is the same argument that was made in 1964, by the way, and then again in 1977 and in 2005 and 2014. Like it seems like 12 years is like the number. Why can't it just be technology will solve this problem when it can? Why does that have to be now? Why 12 years?
Well, yeah, and
Best
I
as you
think the
can.
I think the real reason, this to me comes down to the first thing that we started with, and that is the amount of power and money available to those who use a global crisis to secure for themselves more control. Because
Right.
a logical, from my perspective, and now I'm not a scientist, so but I read lots of scientists. But a logical approach to the problem would be gradual transition at the same time that we mitigate the problems that have come up. Now, this is how humanity has addressed every problem throughout our history. There's
Yeah.
been floods. We haven't had water where we need it. So we come up with a technological solution. It doesn't happen overnight, but we also haven't killed everybody to do it. So the real reason it's being talked about in the ways it has, to with very detrimental effects, I would say also that there's over 50% of young people are concerned about whether this is going to literally end their lives. They're not going to be able to have children. They're not
Yeah.
going to have a future because they're
And,
being
and they're not even
told,
trying to have children because they're afraid of this.
because they believe that their lives and Earth is going to become a burning cinder. I mean, what was it? Al Gore not too long ago was talking about this is why the oceans are boiling. Well, Mr. Vice President, sir, with all due respect, I don't think the oceans are boiling
Right.
currently. So there's just too much hyperbole in that. But it's because you don't get big money and you don't get ultimate control unless you get a crisis. That's how
So
it works.
let me again, best as you can. If you take that argument you just made, which I fully agree that there is an element of people who are going to seize the day and at any opportunity try to increase their wealth and ultimately their power and influence over others. There's no question. Okay, so let's park that for a second. Next to that one, what are the top one, two, or three reasons why it has to be right now instead of that? Are there any?
Well, I think from a logical perspective, there really aren't any good ones that say that it's got to be dealt with in the next several years, because we're told that it's an existential crisis. We're not told that it's a gradual crisis. And it is indeed a gradual crisis. It's something that's not happening tomorrow. It's happening tomorrow through the foreseeable future. So this is not something that we're going to be able to solve overnight, and therefore giving all of our power and wealth and autonomy to somebody to do that has no real good reason. The only way that they can
Yeah,
get that to happen is that crisis. I don't know of any other argument that's an honest argument. No, there are people that
yeah,
will argue, for instance, that the amount of heat that's being captured by the Earth's oceans is like thousands of nuclear bombs every single day. Now, one of the problems with this whole field is we know a lot, but there's a lot more that we don't know, that we
right.
assume. And therefore, grabbing on to those some things that we do know and speculating beyond that and making drastic decisions and drastic recommendations from that, that's where the real problem comes in.
Yeah, and before we dive into that part, I think the other thing that is in this hyperbolic discussion, if you want to call it that, which doesn't really feel like a discussion to me. It feels like people shouting at each other,
That's
and we'll
right.
get more into that later. But part of what's lost is, I would argue, the number one thing that separates human beings from all other species on the planet is our ability for problem solving. Like
Yes,
that, if
you
we
bet.
if we didn't have that, we're literally not much better than the next top most evolved species on the planet. I would say that that's it. So
Yep.
so we discount our number one asset as a species and say we can't do this, we can't solve this problem. Simultaneously, the really smart people can solve this problem if you just don't listen, don't argue with them and give them more money and
Right.
more influence. They can solve it, but collectively, now we can't do it. Anyhow, we'll come back to that, I guess. The other thing that I think that is missing in this conversation, again, because it just jumps to hyperbole like immediately in all cases, it seems like to me,
Yep.
is we default to this measuring of time from 1850-ish, around the Industrial Revolution, to current time, and which in my mind, over, if you look at a 4 billion year history of a planet, that's, I don't know, less than 20% of the time that's passed. I'm going to guess somewhere in there. I'm not a
Oh,
math
yeah,
whiz,
more or less.
but it's what we focus on this period of time. So when the Earth was formed 4 billion years ago or whatever it was, there was no water and it was molten lava everywhere. So it's cooled significantly from then.
Oh, yeah.
And then we've had ice ages and it's warmed significantly from them. And the last quote unquote mini ice age was around 10,000 years ago. It's warmed significantly from them. We know this because it's not full of ice. And so in between the last ice age and the mini ice age, there was periods of time where it was warm then. And I've heard from some folks, I don't know if this is true or not. This is part of the problem with this whole conversation is you don't know what you can believe. You don't know what's realistic. You don't know it's people just padding numbers to make their case. But I've heard people argue that between the last ice age and the last mini ice age, it was significantly warmer than it is today. So we don't ever get to say like when's the official start line of
Right.
global or climate change. We just and it's all these things at once. It's simultaneously cooler than it was at a period of time ago, and it's simultaneously warmer than it was a period ago. We only focus on this period of this last 175 years or whatever. Is there a rational reason for that other than people just trying to make their case?
Well, I think the reason for the focus on the last 150 years or so is to just determine how much we have an impact on that. Now, the point you bring up is a great point, because maybe some of this is natural processes, and it was going to get warmer anyway.
Right.
Maybe now, and what has to happen, to your point, what has to happen in a functionally healthy society to debate is that would be a question that gets debated. However, if you
Right.
say, for instance, that human beings are not 100% responsible, and I don't know what percentage responsible we are, I don't know. But if you
Yeah.
say we're not 100% responsible for every bit of warming that's happened since the industrial age, you're a climate denier, Brian. You're a climate denier.
Right.
You must be shunned, excommunicated, and put out of all the parties that are with important people.
Yeah.
So this is really the problem. A healthy, robust debate about, are we 50%? Are we 70%? Are we 10%? How much of this is natural? This goes to my point earlier of what we do and don't know. We know
Right.
plenty, but there's one of the big things that people talk about in climate circles these days is the North Atlantic flow. I think it's called AMOC. I can't remember what the term means, but it's the
Yeah.
flow of cold and warm water that really takes care of a lot of important things for us. And is it going to
Yeah.
stop? Is it slowing down? All of that. And the ultimate answer is we don't know. And
Right.
that's a fair answer. The most important
How
answer
much
in science is we don't know.
how much of this do you think is, and I've never really thought about this, it just kind of popped in my head. How much of this do you think is placing all this certainty? We have 12 years and we know we're responsible for this. How much do you think is just people putting themselves at ease, honestly, to overcome the uncertainty of things that are could be catastrophic? Like, again, when I was in junior high or high school or whatever, they talked about one day the North and South Pole will just flip spots, and that would like
Yeah,
decimate all of our technology, and that freaked some people out. And so if we speak about these things in certainty, do you think part of this is just people wanting to be at ease, like they kind of got it figured out, and there's less scary uncertainty out there?
that's absolutely part of it. That's I think that's a big driving part of it. There's that. There's the if you don't have if you've reached a conclusion, and that is that climate change is bad, and that climate change is the worst thing of all. I mean, so President Biden right now, as we record this, is contemplating a climate crisis, an emergency, sort of like we had with COVID, in which they can force us to
Right.
do all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Well, you don't get to the place where you can compel people to take action without 100% certainty this is what's happening, and you don't get to the
Yeah.
place where you can compel an outcome. So in other words, the ends justify the means. Now maybe somebody
Right.
believes that climate change by the year 2100, yeah, and there are models for what happens if we do nothing, what happens if we go extreme, strong against
Yeah.
this. The UN has models on this, and none of them are existential destruction of planet Earth models. Not the experts are not saying that, at least not
Right.
at the UN, at the IPCC. So, but unless you have that kind of certainty, you're not going to get, and if you don't have that kind of hyperbole, you're not going to drive the conversation. And so therefore people are willing to go way beyond what the data says in terms of this rhetoric, like 12 years. If we don't solve it in 12 years, then Earth is done and we're all
Yeah.
going to fry on a molten Earth.
And part, part of what baffles me about human beings in particular, like we're just kind of an odd species, it feels like the the we are simultaneously saying that we have this certainty, this knowledge. We discount all the previous times we've been wrong, and there's been a few
Oh
just in
yeah.
my short lifetime. There's been a
Right.
lot of times we've had this level of certainty and being dead wrong
Yep.
about climate change and a whole bunch of other topics. We forgive ourselves for that, and we don't contemplate the scope in which this magnitude of this problem we're discussing.
Right.
For example, how much conversation or how much knowledge is there about how much distance is between the Earth and the Sun? For example, does that vary by 12,000 miles every
Right.
140 years, or does it vary by 600,000 miles every 400,000 years? Like,
Right.
okay, well, that's a factor we can't even know probably, or if we do, I never heard it talked about. What there's bounds to be like the percentage of things that we know about this topic and how our relationship to the sun and heat and cold and like we know well under 1% of the knowable things about this topic. and we have all this certainty, which again goes back to we have to all act collectively, in which outcomes will be different for people who are regular folks than other folks. And I think that this could be easily solved if we just kind of had this approach, like, hey, here's the things we're certain about, and have people debate that, like public.
Yes.
Like, I don't know anybody who would dismiss a public debate where you had 5 people on one side of the topic and 5 people on the other side of the topic,
Right.
and we just had a Zoom call or a public forum in a high school auditorium or something like that, and we recorded it, and bring your best 5 experts and your 5 experts, and let's figure out what we know and what we don't know. I
Right.
think folks would be interested in that. I think people do want
Absolutely.
to solve this problem. It's interesting to me that if you pose questions like that, like you said, it's instantly you're a name caller, you're a climate denier, you're a science denier, you're this or that. And this is what forces people to the conclusion, I think, that this isn't really about solving the climate issue. It's we're skipping the things that are logical things, how you would problem solve things in your own life, in your own
Right.
household. We're skipping over things like the mass uh, out in the Pacific Ocean. There's like a 10 square mile area where it's just garbage is collected there because of the way
Right.
the currents work. We're skipping over solving that problem. We're skipping over the part where China can add a new coal mine, a coal factory or coal, whatever it is, power plant, every 3 months, as we're locking ourselves down. They're not going to do anything different. Indonesia's not going to do anything different. Russia, I mean, we're skipping over these obvious
Right.
things, and I don't understand how people who are really smart experts, like you're saying, aren't aware that this is just pushing people to reject this whole notion, even if some of the stuff they're saying is quite true.
So the public is not interested in addressing these problems on a large scale basis because there's so much hyperbole around it, and so therefore real progress is not happening. If there is, and I believe there is a problem, I believe there's an actual real problem, and if that problem is going to be addressed, it's got to be done in such a way that engages the public, not scares them out of their wits. One of the things the public knows intuitively and instinctively is that humanity, is terrible at predicting crises and disasters. And when we do predict
Right.
crises and disasters, look at in our own lifetime, Y2K. You remember Y2K?
I do.
Y2K, there's going to be, we only have 2-digit dates, and therefore
Yep.
the world's probably going to come crashing in. And we're all
Yeah.
sitting there on 1999, December 31st, and we've all made provision. And Y2K was like, oh, okay, nothing. So we're
Yeah.
terrible. We make these predictions, and we make those other predictions that we talked about before about the new ice age and all this other stuff. And at the same time, we miss things like 9/11. We miss things like 2008, the great financial
Yeah.
crisis. We miss things like the Great Depression. The greatest crises we miss, and the things we think are going to be the greatest crises turn out to be not quite what we thought they would be. And in this case,
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons I think the public is not terribly excited about this. On every survey, they have things that are much, much, much higher, except the activist sort of class and
Right.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
far
Of
left.
course.
They have things that are much higher on their priority list than climate change. And that's the reason why. But the problem with that is that if it were higher on people's list, if it were higher in the public consciousness, and we could have that debate, and people wouldn't just be name called if they said, well, maybe we can do some things to mitigate it and some things to move away from these other technologies. If that actually did happen, we'd stand a better chance of solving it than the current way it's being positioned. And if we weren't
Yeah.
told, just trust the experts.
Right. I think that that's the piece that is the most baffling. Let's assume that these people are having a good faith argument, and a lot of what they're saying is true. I don't necessarily agree with that, but let's. I think that I think you can find people to get the outcomes you want for studies you do when their
Of
entire
course.
livelihood is based upon getting funding,
Yep.
and it's well known up front, if you won't reach this conclusion, you won't get the funding.
Right.
I think that perverts some of the objectivity of these things. So I'm skeptical about those kinds of things for sure. But let's say the majority of the things that their concerns are legitimate and they're real.
Yes.
They are just absolute buffoons when it comes to how they present the information. And if they
Exactly.
can't figure out basic human nature, like, hey, if you want people to really upend their lives in certain parts of the world, but not others, and you want them to get on board with this and take some steps back in their standard of living and things like that, you better put some effort into presenting the evidence in a very transparent, objective way. Or guess what? Whether you like it or not, fair or unfair, you're going to get some pushback, specifically from people who live in countries where they were founded, like ours, rejecting the idea of royalty and people telling them what to do and telling them how what kind of faith they're supposed to have in
That's
how
right.
the universe works and in God and religion and things like that. If you even if they're again if they're majority of what they're saying is right, if they can't figure out basic human nature and how to just explain this, how the hell are we supposed to give them credit for the ability to solve these problems?
It's exactly right. It's exactly right. Unless you can answer some very basic, unless those who want us to take drastic action can answer some very basic questions, such as about 70% of the world is still developing, and they are
Right.
going to develop as we energy is at the core of all of modern progress. Energy is
Yeah.
at the core, and specifically fossil fuels are at the core of all of our
Cheap
medical
energy for sure.
advances.
Yeah.
They're at the core of all of our technology advances. They're at the core of everything. The rest of the world wants the same opportunity that we have to raise their
Yeah.
standard of living. And if you can't answer how you're going to bring the entire rest of the world along on any kind of scheme you've got to reduce emissions, then you're not going to convince people that it's worth them not being able to live their lives as they see fit. It's just not going to happen.
Right. So you're going to tell, regular middle class America, you're going to reduce your standard of living. But the elites here are going to go ahead and keep their planes, and they're going to keep
Right.
going to the Caribbean and places where you won't be able to go to anymore. And this is I'm not making this stuff up, by the way.
Yeah.
These are things they're saying, like 2050, no airplane travel for very unessential travel. Which who decides what
Who
unessential is?
decides
Who
that?
knows?
Right.
Forget it, whatever. So rich people will still have their ability to do that kind of stuff. Regular folks won't. They'll take a couple steps back in their standard of living. Okay, well, we don't get to control what they do in Africa and Asia and things like that. They've made it pretty clear they're not going to do that. So we're going to have this situation where the plan is, as best I can tell, Western middle class is going to take some steps back. Other undeveloped countries will continue developing, or are we going to say no? You're done where you're at, and you're going to live 14 steps behind us in these developed countries. Like, how is this supposed to happen? Who's supposed to make these decisions, and how the hell do they expect people to go along with this?
And that's the reason that it's a non-starter, because not everything you just mentioned is what are the only paths. If you look at it from the perspective of it's a crisis and we got a draconian lockdowns and you all got to stay home now, just like we did during COVID. If you look at it from that perspective, then you're right. None of those things are going to happen because the rest of the world, India is not going to be willing to give up natural gas, which they're
Right,
investing heavily into. As you said, China's
and nor
building
should
coal
they.
plants. And no, and yeah, exactly. Why? Who are we to say you should give this up? Or who are we? Who are the elites in this country to say, well, we want all of you in America to reduce your standard of living by 50% or 30% or 20% or
Yeah,
10%? The people are just not going to go along to it with it. The people that say that are going to be ejected from office. They're going to be railroaded out of town, and they're going to say, go away. We're not interested. People are not going
yeah.
to willingly do that.
I don't know how they're going to navigate this part. If what there's granting them the majority of what they say is true, and they're just absolute buffoons when it comes to explaining things to people, I would love to know: is the plan to tell China and people in Asia and Africa you're stopping where you're at as far as your evolution as a country and sophistication with energy and growth out of poverty, like the Western countries have had their growth out of poverty over the last 500 years or whatever it's been? You need to stop. Is that the plan? Or no, you're going to go ahead and continue, and our people are going to stop. Like, either way, I think it's a tough sell.
Well, and this is where I've had this discussion with people about this, people that are on the other side of the issue from me, who think you can force your way into a all these restrictions, and basically they're in denial. When I ask the question,
Yeah,
well, what about China? What about India? What about Nigeria? What about Brazil? What about all these countries
right.
that are on the rise? Well, they're building more solar panels in China. Okay, but let's talk about it. en masse. Let's talk about their entire energy portfolio. Let's talk about India's
Yeah.
entire energy portfolio. India's building more of this and more of that. Great, they're doing that, but is it enough to offset their growth in emissions? No, not even close. Well, they've said they've
Right.
planned to do this. They've said they've signed on to Paris. They've signed on to the Kyoto Accords. They've signed. Everybody who signed onto the Paris Accords, almost nobody has done what they said they were going to do,
Right.
because people like to be part of the club. They like to say all the nice words. They like to say, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And because it gets some news cycles, they love the news cycles. But when it comes down to coming back to the citizens saying, okay, citizens of France, you're going to have to reduce your consumption of petrol. Then you have the yellow jacket, revolution, where you're going to have
Right.
all of these different things that, practically speaking, don't apply. So they're in denial. They're just in denial when
Yeah.
it comes to a global
And
solution.
I would also just kind of throw this question out. What's the last like 5 things that all countries have agreed upon?
I can tell you in 1 minute. That's it.
So, yeah.
That's it.
So it seems like the bar for achievement here seems overwhelmingly, the bar for
Right.
explaining seems really low, and the bar for the like the understanding, or not a bar, I guess, but the methodology in which we're applying this, as in should be top down enforcement
Right.
or bottom up problem solving, that feels a little askew.
Yeah.
It just feels like all these problems are, and I don't mean this sarcastically, I mean this literally. These feel like insurmountable problems. I don't know how you get all countries to agree on a thing. I
Right.
just
You
don't know how
don't.
that's possible.
You don't.
I don't know how you either tell people that in Africa and Asia and Southern America and other places like that, that they're going to continue evolving and growing, and we're going to go backwards. Or conversely, how you tell them you're going to stop right where you're at, and everyone's going to stop right where they're at. And actually, we're going to take a few steps back, and you might have to also, except for these super rich people. I don't know how you put that. Seems insurmountable. How you extract enough dollars to solve this problem seems insurmountable.
Exactly.
The idea of some people, elected or not, like forget governments for a minute. The idea that people think they have the authority bestowed upon them to block out the sun seems an insurmountable thing to explain to people. These wild things just seem so implausible to me that's where I get lost. Like, I get that the temperatures change. I get that we're probably likely part of that, maybe significantly. I don't know, because we can't ever get data that's not hyperbolically. And Al Gore and his 37-foot ladder and whatever that turned out to not be so true. And I'm sure that people who are fighting this are saying things that are not true. They're hyperbolic too.
Right.
That's insurmountable at this point. It just all feels to me like it comes down to these are not well thought out, which leaves only one conclusion in my mind, which is the thing we start out with. It really smells of power grab and restricting people, and the solutions to get out of that feeling are simple.
Right. Right. And so the thing that could happen. So let me give you a plausible future and what could happen to actually make a difference here. So if we took, let's say, 20% of the angst and the energy in the public, the public presentation of doom and gloom, and we've got 12 years by 2030 where the Earth's and Al Gore's the oceans are boiling. If we took 20% of all that energy that's put into that and said, look, the Earth is getting warmer, and therefore we're going to need ways to deal with this. We're going to need mitigation, and we're also going to need new technologies that don't exist yet to help us make this transition. And we had a
Right.
Kennedy-esque. You remember? Well, you don't remember, but you know your history at the
No,
beginning.
I'm far too young to remember anything about John Kennedy.
Well, I was on the earth with him for about 5 months, so just born right
Okay.
before he
All
died.
right.
But you remember his speech where he talked about that
Yeah.
he committed the nation to go to the moon by the end
Yep.
of the decade and do everything else that we had to do just as a
Right.
nation. And we did not have the technology to do that. We didn't have the funding to do that. We didn't have anything to do that, but we had a motivation to do that. And he got the whole country behind us. That
Right.
vision actually took us to the moon. If we had that
Yeah.
same kind of initiative now, that wasn't a negative initiative, his initiative
Right.
really was a positive initiative. Now, There was
Yeah,
stuff behind it that was negative, like, holy crap, the Soviets have beat us into space with Sputnik, and they're kicking our butt.
right,
They're going to be a bigger military power. We got to do something about that. But he didn't position it like that. He positioned it as an obstacle to overcome. We don't know how to do it yet, but we're committed to it. If that's the way we did this, if that's the way, and everybody would benefit, because I could get
yeah,
an EV that drives for 1,000 miles on one charge and doesn't cost me $80,000. I'd be interested
right.
in that vehicle. I'd buy
Well,
it.
what he was selling was advancement. He was selling advancing the species, not just
Yes.
people who lived in South Dakota, not
Yes.
just people who lived in Texas, and not just people who lived in Martha's Vineyard. This was advancing mankind. That's what he was selling. And
Right.
we said, we're the ones who are going to do it. And you know what? We all rallied behind. Again, I wasn't there,
Yep.
but the country rallied behind and was excited, exuberant about that. Again, that's why I'm
Exactly.
saying like the problems that are creating this rift are easily solvable
Yeah.
problems. And people way smarter than me know this, and there's a reason they're not doing it.
That's right.
So let's move on to the next piece of this, which is, the only modalities I've heard again are the other people's money and restrictions, and there's zero um a tolerance for any kind of debate that's not hyperbolic. Like I
Right.
said, you immediately go to the camps and you throw out these hyperbolic things that smells of how religious debates are had.
Yes.
And this feels like a very, even though there's no God talked about in climate change, it does feel to me like the planet becomes God in this
Yes.
scenario. That it does feel like there part of the discussion, a significant part of the discussion, I would say, is a theological one. In that either you're in a camp that believes that we were put here as a species by a creator who created us in his own image to thrive here and and be served by the planet. Now that doesn't mean we're not good stewards of our area.
Right.
It doesn't mean we don't clean up after ourselves. It doesn't mean we don't take care of things. It doesn't mean we just show up and trash the place like your brother-in-law's neighbor coming to a party and like what I get that. Like we have to be good stewards of it. But we were put here by a deity, a creator to thrive, and the planet is here, and the things the planet produces are here to basically serve us and enrich our lives. Or you think that we're the scourge, and the planet is the deity or the god, and we are here to serve the planet, which means, by the way, limiting the number of people who can be because we're the scourge, and deer are higher on the hierarchy than we are because they don't create all the problems we do. Is there a piece I'm missing there, Dave? Does it feel that binary? I hate to get these things into binary kind of things, but this does kind of feel that binary to me.
Well, it does have all the hallmarks of a religious war, of a religious debate, because on one side you've got a priesthood. So let's take the climate extremist side. I'm going to take that group. On
Yep.
the climate extremist side, you've got priests. And these are the people that cannot be questioned. A priest cannot be questioned. And
Right.
you've got words and doctrines that are non-questionable. If you deny this, you are a climate denier, which is essentially saying you're a heretic.
Yes.
You're a denier of the faith.
Dave, not all of us know what heretic means. What is the definition of a heretic?
A heretic is somebody who has denied the true faith. And so a
Okay.
heretic to the climate priesthood is to say that one, it's not the apocalypse, because in that space, you also have an apocalypse. I mean, every religion
Right.
has some apocalypse, some end time event that is the culmination of world affairs, or has some kind of apocalyptic feel to it. So if you deny the fundamental doctrine, you're a heretic, you're a denier of the apocalypse. In fact, if you say that we need to figure out a way to live with it and a way to adapt ourselves to it with better technologies, then you're also a denier, because you're denying the holy war. You're denying we have to get people. If you eat a cow, if you have that hamburger, you are a
Yeah.
sinner. You're a sinner
Right.
if you buy any whale stock. You're a sinner. You're a ESG violator if
Yeah.
you buy an oil stock. So you have all of those aspects of faith. And the reason you could know it's faith is because if it were science, if all of these things were just based on science, the fundamental basis of science is saying, well, why is that true? But if you
Right.
say, for instance, if you say, well, why do you think we're the sole cause of that? Oh no, you have
Yeah.
uttered unholy words. You're a climate denier. You're evil. So that it really is that it's really that simple.
Let me just I think you're 100 you're spot on right there. The questions you cannot ask, and I'm not saying that I'm questioning priests. I'm not saying that. But things you cannot ask a priest is why and how do you know?
Right,
The priest is the only one, the only way you would know a priest was a fraud is if the priest told you.
right,
Like there's no other way to know,
right,
right?
right.
The priest has this relationship with God that you don't have, and you maybe frankly could not understand, and there's an elevated level of there's a hierarchy there where they're elevated and we're down below that if you're in that particular faith or whatever, because they're there to teach. They're
Yes.
not there to serve, they're there to teach, right? Well, I guess they're there to serve some, but you're not allowed to ask them why, because the answer is only God knows sometimes.
Well, and part of the reason that this is so hard for people to accept as well is because over the last, say, 500 years in Western society, we've had a democratization of everything. We've had a democratization of religion. Martin Luther said, "Why should I listen to the Pope? The Pope's, he's
Right.
he's he's not all. I can talk to God myself directly." So we've had a
Yeah.
democratization of faith, where the Bible, and when the printing press came along, was now written so that the common person could read it. You didn't have to have
Yeah.
a Latin background to read it. But in the climate space, it's like, well, are you a climate scientist? Do you read these?
Well, that's the point I'm getting at. You cannot ask the advocates, the super elite of the climate. You can't ask them why and how do you know.
Right,
You can't go down that path because you're questioning them and
right.
their status. Not they're not obligated to give you any kind of facts. It appears much like a priest back in 1493 or whatever.
Exactly. And that's why the public, that's why I say the public is not going to accept these top down solutions, especially now that we've had the crisis of confidence in the elites because the elites have failed us so badly during COVID. We've had a crisis of confidence and we need technologists, we need scientists, we need smart people. But those people, to your point earlier, if those people don't communicate on our level, if an elite's job is to make sure that the non-elite, the scientist's job is to make sure that I understand what they know, not so that I'll obey their commands, but so that I can make decisions about what I want to do next. If an
Right.
elite, if a scientist, if somebody highly educated, if they are unable to come to me and say, here's the implications of the things I know, here's why I know what I know, and ask me any question you want under the sun, and I'll be happy to answer it for you. If they do that, they will be successful in communicating and helping us to understand how to make a decision on whether we think we believe them or not. But if they don't do
Right.
that, they fail. And that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I saw a commercial yesterday, or actually, it was a 5 minute story on the TV about a guy who's making basically a drone. You drive like a car now,
Yeah.
and it's going to be $300,000 or whatever. And I literally nudged my wife. And I was like, I want one of those. I don't know anybody who wouldn't be excited about evolving our technology and
Yes.
taking things and advancing the species. I
Right.
don't know anybody who's like, I mean, there are people on the planet that way, I suppose, who still live the way they did 500 years ago. Okay, that's 3% or less in the population. The vast majority of people are completely open to, if not looking forward to, advancements,
Yes.
which would probably align with solving this problem. But again, to your point, like the heresy bucket and the priesthood and the lack of belief by the people who are supposedly know these things, that they have any kind of obligation to explain it or get buy-in. That's where people are.
Right.
I think that is the issue, not the metrics. Although I think that there's ambiguity at best on the metrics. Some of them just don't seem to make a lot of sense. Some of them seem like we figured out what we wanted to say first, then we paid the right people to say that, and that's who got the funding. Like, and that's been throughout the history of governments, that's been proven over and over and over. It's not like we're just saying this particular group of 117 scientists that applies to. It's been this way since
Right.
Galileo was around.
Yeah.
Over and over and over, we've proved that this is how we'll do things sometimes. But the solution to that is super simple. Let's have the public debate. Let's open the door. We can ask questions. Let's explain a path forward. Explain how we're going to solve these problems. I don't know a person who wouldn't get on board if that was the way it was presented.
Absolutely. And I think ultimately, Brian, I think the way that this is gonna sort of evolve over time, and it already is evolving this way over time. The elites have lost control of the conversation. There are now they'll probably still attempt a top-down solution, but it's not going to work because people will rebel against that. So I think what's going to happen over time is, and it is actually right now happening over time. More and more people are believing that our solution to this is a technological solution that sure, government can be involved, but government's not going to drive it because you're not going to get every government on earth to agree on everything. And you're not going to get every population in every country to agree, even if their government did. So it's not going to happen. So people are beginning to see the opportunity. Then even Bill Gates wrote a book. I think it was like 10 ways to avoid the climate crisis. Most of his book, and I read the book, it was actually pretty good. He talked about the different technologies that could be used that we need to develop and we don't really have fully developed yet. And he's actually investing
Yeah.
billions of dollars into. He's investing in nuclear, but which is in this country is a
Yeah,
nasty word.
that's as taboo as anything. Yep.
Oh yeah, well, and nuclear is a bad word only because we know there is a thing called a nuclear bomb, not because of the technology, but only because we know there's a
Yeah.
thing called a nuclear bomb. So
Yeah.
that's why.
Just like avocados are bad because there's fat in them.
Right, that's right. So it's not logical, but this is ultimately what's going to happen. I predict that, and maybe I'm just too optimistic about these things, but I predict as technology continues to advance incrementally, things will change that will allow us to not have as big an impact. I mean, there's a fascinating example if anybody wants to look at it of what's happening in Venice, and they've invented this great closing and opening door for the peninsula where they can actually close off during some high tide so that Venice doesn't flood so badly. And now they've got
Yeah.
a new plan, a new technological plan, because they can't hold out the water forever because it is going up. They've got a new technological plan, which will even cost less, that will actually raise the entire city by injecting water, hydrologic water underneath the city gradually over a period of years. So it will raise. So we will mitigate the problems of climate change through
Right.
technology over a long period of time. And when problems happen, whatever problems end up happening, what the human race is great at, and what we've done for millennia, is problems happen, we figure out a way to do it. That's what makes us different from the animals, like you said earlier. We will figure out a
Yeah.
way for whatever's coming down the road. I mean, sure, if the sun blows up, we're done. We can't figure out a way around
Yeah.
that one. But I have full confidence that the human race is clever enough to mitigate whatever problems are coming down the road without impoverishing everybody in the world and will allow the world
Well,
population to
and here's where we
increase.
get back into the religious thing again. Can you imagine a priest of whatever religion saying, the general population is smart enough to figure this out. They don't need me. I'm going to go ahead and defer to their judgment. This
Yeah.
is why this is how it feels like a religion, because
Yes.
we don't. There's no objectivity. There's no measurables. There's no certainty, but there's no ability for common folks to have influence or say. That's why it feels like a religious movement to me more than a science thing. All the things you just said are true. The people 150 years from now are going to look back at this and go, well, it seemed like a big deal then.
Right.
Whatever their situation now is, they've overcome it to whatever degree possible.
Exactly. Well, and that's
It's
and it's going to play out, I think, a lot like the Protestant Reformation and the American Revolution. I mean, both of those situations, both the Protestant Reformation and the American Revolution and other revolutions that have happened since then, were the democratization of power. So
yeah,
but what does power do? What does power do when it's being democratized? It fights like the devil to preserve its power. It gets more
yeah,
hyperbolic. You know, the Pope threatening anybody that follows this Luther heretic is going to burn in hell forever. What does, King George? Well, we're going to hang all these people, all these revolutionaries, these nobodies in America for rebelling against the crown. So you can expect that in
right.
this debate it will happen the same way, and that's why there's such high emotions. That's why you have people screaming, about if we don't do the Green New Deal, we're all going to be ashes on the floor of a
Right.
burnt, spent cinder of a planet.
I think that's something that I hope, my children's generation learns quicker than we have. Is it doesn't matter what the organization is. It gets to a size where self-preservation becomes the number
Yes,
one objective. And that's true for companies, that's true for governments, that's true for industry associations, any churches, like
Yep.
organizations get to a size where self-preservation is first and foremost the thing that has to happen. And we can acknowledge that, but when we see it manifest itself, we see how it actually is applied, we don't necessarily catch it as it's happening. I think this is one of those things where we can see in real time how it's happening. Like the government is growing, it's running out of things to manage. Like there's there's it's literally where the average citizen can be put in prison for any average citizen now can be put in prison for breaking a federal law. This has been
Yep.
proven numerous times. The average person breaks enough laws every year that it doesn't matter how good you are and how kind you are, you could be put in prison.
Yes.
The government's running out of things to manage, and it's running out of ways to reward people who put the people in power,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so we're developing this new green technology, and we're overlooking things that we used to care about just 15 years ago. Like
Yes.
just 15 years ago, saving the whales was still a battle cry for people who were, anti-pollution and anti-global warming and taking care of all that stuff. And now windmills are being put in the oceans that are literally killing whales, and there's zero discussion about that.
Yeah.
Windmills are being put on land that are literally killing hundreds or thousands of birds. There's no discussion about that. Solar panel farms are being put in and literally cooking birds midair.
Yes.
No discussion about that. These things we used to care about are gone, and it's clear to see the motive has changed. That the way we recognize what is quote unquote good is not what it was 15 years ago, and that feels again like a religion, and it also feels like an organization. In this case, the government just continuing to grow because it's self-preservation mode,
That's
which
what
is
it does.
paramount.
Yeah, it exists for self-perpetuation. That's exactly right. And and as you say, when it runs out of things to do, what's going to happen? You're going to see essentially the death throes of the old way of thinking about the old bureaucracy. Bureaucracies, grow at a steady pace until the superstructure of that bureaucracy, again, whether it's, I don't care what it is, corporation, nonprofit, whatever, church, it grows to a certain point and then it collapses under its own weight. And that's
Right.
where we're at with a lot of these systems that we're seeing today. And the proof of that is look at the trust in the United States for various institutions. There's not many institutions that have very much trust from the populace. When you lose the populace, when you lose the trust of the populace as a large organization, whatever organization it is, then that organization is going to either be reformed to be more responsive to the population again, or it's going to pass away. And no matter how much you
Yeah.
say the experts know what they're doing, the public now does not believe it. The public uniform, and
Yeah.
that's not a controversial, a few years ago, that would have been a controversial thing to say. It's not controversial right now. All of the data says that the public does not trust the experts. The public does not trust the big institutions because they can see how they've been corrupted to drive certain agendas that benefit certain people and don't touch the rest of us. And that's
Right.
why this debate is not going to go anywhere.
Yeah. Right. And again, this is another one of those problems that the experts not being trusted is a very solvable problem. It would not take very long to solve the trust issue on this particular topic for sure.
Right.
It would take a reasonable amount of objectivity, a reasonable amount of humility, and like explaining what we know and what we don't know, a reasonable amount of explaining, like, here's what we really think we can get done to solve this problem, and here's how we're going to have a discussion about deciding how much advancement there can be to through technology versus how many things we might have to give up that maybe are contributing. Maybe we have to get rid of coal mining. Okay, well, let's put that in our top 5 things to do in the next 20 years,
Right.
and let's devote that 20% you're talking about to creating energy alternatives so we can get rid of that. Again, I don't know anybody who would be anti that.
Right. And
It's
if
just
it's
this: shut up and do what you're told, shut up and don't question us,
right.
and we're not obligated to give you any kind of facts and figures or any level of humility or any level of explaining things in a way that is logical. and just do what you're told anyway. And by the way, write a bigger check.
And this is what the great leaders over the years have known. They've been approachable. They've been aspirational. I mean, you look at Reagan's Morning in America speech back in the early '80s. He was, I believe in our best future. Not if you don't do what I say, you're all gonna
Right.
fry on a crispy earth. Look again back to John F.
Yeah.
Kennedy's speech. Look at how look at the sort of the FDR's. Now I'm not a fan of a lot of what FDR did. But look at some of the ways that FDR communicated at the beginning of World War II. There's a very a public-centered, aspirational approach to it. Look at Winston Churchill. Even when faced with the potential destruction of the British nation, he said, "We will fight on the shores. We'll fight in the fields. We'll fight in the streets." I mean, so yeah, it's fighting, but it was all aspirational. It's like, we're never going to give up. We're going to beat this thing. Not if you don't do what I say, you're going to fry. And that's really the problem in this debate.
Well, that and when he was talking about that, and FDR was talking about that, and Reagan was talking about that, and Kennedy was talking about they were explaining this to people who they valued and said, you deserve a brighter future.
Right.
And that is not the message today. The message is you do not deserve a brighter future. You deserve to pay for these sins you've committed against my God, which is the planet in this case. You don't deserve this better thing. In fact, if it didn't work out for you and your family and rubes like you who are ruining things, that's probably for the best.
Right.
I think that's an underlying thing that the Reagan speech and the FDRs and all these people had. Like, they were genuinely rooting for the people they were talking to.
Yeah, that's right. And that's where the future is a more democratized future. Whatever we go through in the next 10 or 15 years, whatever kind of crises we have to face, et cetera, I think what comes out of that is a more democratized future where people do believe that the institutions care about them, and now nobody believes the institutions care about them.
Right.
Nobody believes that their leaders really care about them. We just, the only thing we want from our leaders is for our side to win, not for them to genuinely solve our problems. And this is I think this is short lived. It can't survive. A nation can't survive that way.
Right. I totally agree. Well, Dave, anything else you want to add to this? I think we've kind of hit the high points here. There's no question this is a topic I'm sure we will be bumping into again here and there. There's so many things that kind of run in and out of this topic. I'm sure we'll be getting back to it. But anything else you want to finish up with today?
I think we're good, Brian. We've solved the climate change crisis.
We certainly have. All right. Well, don't forget, if please, one of the things we really want to happen with this particular podcast is we want you to have a place to chime in, share your opinion. Where did we get it right? Where did we completely miss it? What's really going on underneath that we've completely missed sight of, Dave and I, as we're talking about this stuff? Our goal is to give you guys listening a place to get this stuff off your chest, and let's really figure out what's going on here, and skip the hyperbolic conversations and skip the tribalism and all that kind of stuff. Tell us where we got it right, where we didn't get it wrong, or we got it wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com. So until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.